So, Berto, I read this article online the other day talking about the most influential TV shows of the decade, because, we're reaching the end of a decade.
What do you mean, like the 90s?
It's crazy to me. It's to think, of course, I knew it's almost 2020.
I can't believe that, man.
But it's like, you got the 80s, the 90s, and you got the 2010s. Coming to an end.
A whole other decade ending.
So we have to now start thinking about all the different things that involve this decade. For example, the most influential TV shows of the 2010s. It was an article, and there were 30 of them, and I thought, you know what? I agree with some, I disagree with some. I want to talk about this with Umberto because I'm sure he has opinions. So let's get into it. What do you say, Berto?
Let's do it.
This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor.
I am Umberto Castaneda, and I have a decaf oat milk farm. So it's like if you want to drink decaf coffee with oat milk, I pre-decaffeinate the oats.
So when we get into this, I'm going to try to talk about the psychological angle. I don't want it to just be about TV because people come to this podcast to hear about psychology. So let's get into it. So Berto, I'll just do mine, and then we'll go to yours. And
All
then,
right.
And so the first thing we're going to talk about is my list of the top 5 most influential TV shows that I think are influential.
Not necessarily your favorites, just the ones you think are most influential.
Exactly.
Got it.
Later, I'll give my top five favorite. And then we'll go into the article on CNET that Amanda Kuzer provided, the top 30. So you can either tell me if any of these coincide with yours as I'm saying it, which I kind of recommend.
Sure.
Or not. It's up to you.
And then if there's some that weren't there, I can fill them in afterwards.
Well, you'll go after me.
Oh, okay, got it.
But if any of these coincide, feel free to comment right away because I think it'll save time. So before going into this, I just have to say that all of these, my top 5 are completely based on my own bias in terms of what I like. Because if I was more mainstream, I would identify shows like America's Got Talent or The Kardashians, or Duck Dynasty,
right,
or one of the great Bake Off shows, because I don't watch any of those shows. So to me,
so I see. So there's an additional bias here. It's not just things they may not even be your favorites, but they're at least shows you're aware of.
Yeah, aware of, and also like.
Okay.
So. Of course, that other person would have come up with a different list.
So this isn't perfectly scientific. Not perfectly.
Yeah, it's near perfect.
Yeah.
Number 5, top of, I'm going in order
is
here.
5 the best?
5 is the lowest
best.
of the 5. So is Trailer Park Boys.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I know this started in 2001, so it's a 20-year-old TV show almost. But it's like the Beatles, this TV show, because it was revolutionary at the time. It was inspirational to so many artists afterwards, so many other showrunners. And when I saw it, I didn't start watching Trailer Park Boys until maybe like 5 years ago. And I binged all the first 10 seasons, and then it went into Netflix and all this kind of stuff.
I think we had this conversation or a similar one where same thing, I never even heard of it maybe or whatever.
Yeah.
And some number of years ago, a few other people mentioned it. And when I first watched it, I thought, it's a lot like this other thing, or it's a lot like this other thing. But I didn't know how old it was at first.
Right. I didn't know either. And then I think I watched like the first season, and I was like, oh, I see. They're doing that thing.
Yeah.
That It's Always Sunny does, or The Office, or Parks and Rec, or Modern Family. They're, that mockumentary style.
Right.
Now, of course, we got to go all the way back to Spinal Tap, and maybe even precursors to that.
Yeah, we're not saying they invented, but like for TV shows, I mean, it was ahead of its time, and it kick-started a lot of stuff.
It's a Canadian show, if you're not familiar, and it was basically on a obscure to me as an American. I don't remember ever hearing about it until it was available on Netflix, say 5 or 6 years ago. And it was, I think, kind of a cult following in Canada, from what I understand. And it's about these 3 guys who live in a trailer park, and they're like 30s, 40s, and they're always trying to do some kind of scam for money or drugs or guns or crime.
As one does.
Yeah, and it's a total comedy. And when I watched it, I was like, oh my God, this came before all these other shows that are almost identical ripoffs of the show. For example, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia is almost exactly like this show.
It's definitely influenced.
The Office, both British and American versions, are, callbacks in a sense.
Right. Although, I mean, the British one was almost contemporaneous, right?
I don't think
British
so.
was 2001.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Huh. Well, okay.
Yeah.
So we have to go back to that too.
Yeah.
Parks and Rec, how they do those little interlude interviews with the characters, as if it's a documentary. A Modern Family, they do the same thing. Essentially, any show where it's a mockumentary, where they do those little interlude interviews. And they're acting like they're real people, and every episode there's sort of like shenanigans that happen. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like the worst of our characters come through.
Which, by the way, I would give a lot of credit to Seinfeld for starting the path, because at the time when Seinfeld came out, characters in shows like that were usually redeemable, and Seinfeld was the first of like somewhat unredeemable characters.
Okay, good. So yeah, I could see it kind of Mark Hart. American Vandal, which was a short mockumentary on Netflix, if you're familiar. Party Down, which I really liked. What We Do in the Shadows.
Oh,
the movie and the TV show. Reno 911.
Oh, totally.
Very much. And to a lesser extent, these non-mockumentary shows like Workaholics.
Right.
Workaholics is like a direct ripoff of Trailer Park Boys, even though I like both Workaholics and Trailer Park Boys.
By the way, I guess it's worth mentioning that this wouldn't have really come about maybe if there hadn't been so much quote-unquote reality TV in the 90s, right? Because it's almost like a few creative people looked at that and rebelled against it. Like, oh, that's BS, and we can do a send-up of that whole thing.
Yeah. I'd also say that Arrested Development, Eastbound and Down, and Broad City are all kind of influenced by Trailer Park Boys. So Trailer Park Boys definitely took place in this decade, and its main influence was in the last decade, but I just really wanted to highlight how important the show was.
Fair enough.
My number 4 is Stranger Things.
Okay.
Stranger Things had a huge impact on the culture. It was a great series, especially the first season.
I've got Stranger Things in number 4.
Okay, interesting.
But not only in the list, but also number 4.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So to me, not only was it an amazing show that like Ready Player One was kind of, generated from that. And I'm guessing we're going to see a lot of other things like that. But the main influence that it has was, and it's hard to even imagine this previous history that wasn't that long ago, just 4 years ago, when Netflix and other types of streaming services that didn't even really exist back then did not produce TV shows that were any good.
Right.
I remember when I first started watching Stranger Things, I was like, wait, so Netflix made this show? That's weird.
Yeah.
It wasn't a thing. Now, of course, all the best TV shows are on Netflix, Amazon, HBO.
They needed a strong hit to start with, right?
Right. And so it really made it so that the consumers could accept the idea that streaming services weren't, because it's, again, hard to remember, but it wasn't that long ago when you just thought of Netflix as, well, they just repurpose. They're like that movie theater, that crappy old movie theater on the corner that shows movies that came out a year ago.
Yeah.
It's like they don't really, they're not cutting edge. They're not
especially the digital subscription. Yeah, because there was still a time where you knew you could order the physical DVDs of the movies you did want to watch, but if you were feeling lazy and like, I just want to watch whatever's there, it was absolutely the C and D rack.
Right. Yeah, it was like movies you never wanted to watch back in the day. And so now most people consider Netflix, Amazon, these other services to be like the primary venue for good. I mean, who goes to like ABC and NBC for like the best TV shows?
Right.
Not many people.
I will say that there was a little period of time in like 2008, 2009, where Netflix had on their digital stuff had a lot of 80s movies that maybe at the time people weren't watching, so that's why they had them. But I loved it because then I would go and rewatch the Karate Kid, like all the Karate Kids and stuff like that, Back to the Futures. I don't know, maybe Back to the Future not so much, but movies like that, you know.
Right. My number 3 is Black Mirror.
Of course.
Again, huge impact on the culture in terms of what we talk about. Totally new show that you could say that it's has, you know, it's a callback to Twilight Zone or something. But man, did they take TV to a whole other level. Each episode is its own little movie, especially some episodes like White Christmas and you know, very influential, I think. Great TV, and it's a total trip to think about. It's been out since 2011.
Yeah.
So it's been almost 9 years, and there's only been 22 episodes.
Oh, wow.
Just think about that.
Although they're long episodes, but yeah.
But in 10 years,
yeah, totally.
22 episodes.
It's funny. So I didn't put Black Mirror on this list, not because, of course, I love it, but I was being sort of along the lines of what you were saying earlier, where I was thinking, well, I like it, and I know Kirk loves it, but I've talked to a lot of people who have never seen it.
Totally. And I would say that of my list here, Black Mirror is probably not as in, you know, globally impactful on the culture just because of that reason. But I think that of the things that, at least in my circle, gets people talking.
Totally.
It's a show like
you could hardly find a one that we've had more discussion about.
Right. My number 2 is Game of Thrones. You got to go.
I definitely have Game of Thrones. I put it number 1.
Oh, okay.
But I could see, you know, it's a top list anyways.
Yeah. So again, huge impact on the culture. Everyone was talking about it during the last 2.5 seasons ish. For better or for worse, really.
That's why I put it number 1, by the way, because even when I was in Colombia, what is it, 2.5 years ago, and I'm sitting there talking to a Colombian person that I just met. What did we have in common to talk about? Game of Thrones.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the pinnacle of the cultural buzz during the season 8 was everywhere. I mean, there wasn't a talk show or a person, everyone of every age. And my number 1 is Orange is the New Black.
What?
Yeah.
Really? Okay, I want to hear this.
Well, do you watch that show?
I've watched a part of the first season, and so this is my reaction is not a comment on quality. I didn't know it was so influential in your mind.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not. So this one I think is a good thing for me to highlight because a good show for me to highlight because this is actually a show that is not in my top 20 TV shows.
Okay.
But I have to recognize the importance of this show.
I want to hear this. I'm probably not aware.
It broke ground, obviously, for women.
Okay.
Which, you know, is something.
Because it's like all female or a lot of female characters.
Right, and very different kinds of characters.
Right.
It completely broke ground for women without makeup who don't look so great. You know, like you got older women, no makeup, you know, like real women, real looks, you know what I mean? People of color,
right?
Lots of people of color, queer people, trans people, gay people, former convicts. I mean, if you said that one of the most popular TV shows in America, you know, say you asked me 2009, one of the most popular TV shows in America of the next, you know, decade is going to highlight queer women of color who are coming out of prison.
Yeah.
And you know, half of Americans are going to be watching that show and talking about it. I'd be like, that's insane. That's stupid.
That's a good argument. I mean, I guess Oz was really interesting when it came out, and it was a show about prisons. It was all men, of course, but it was very. It tackled a lot of similar issues on the male side.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think Orange is the New Black is a lot more popular than
Oh,
Oz.
definitely. Oz was only on HBO. And
Yeah.
the people that liked it, or that watched it, loved it, but not a lot of people watched it.
Yeah, I think that history books will talk about this show when they
Interesting.
refer back to this time.
Oh, that was a curveball I was not expecting.
All right, Berto, so that's my top 5. What are your top 5?
I like it. Well, so similar to you, I certainly have some blind spots when it comes to my understanding of pop culture, but I did put in number 5. I didn't pick a specific one, but I said chef or cooking shows. 'Cause
That's a cop out.
well, okay, I could pick a specific one, I suppose, but
yeah.
fine.
I mean, I could say like space shows or something.
All right. I guess I'll go with the. See, I don't even know the name of it.
Well,
but
Top Chef is really popular.
Is that the one where they?
I don't know.
Yes, Top Chef.
Iron
Top Chef.
Chef?
No, not the Iron Chef was earlier.
Okay.
Top Chef.
Okay.
But the reason I put this one there is because, man, like, first of all, there's so many of them. There's the British Baking Show. There's a ton of dessert shows. There's all the Top Chef. There's Top Chef Junior. There's all these things, right? There's the Hell's Kitchen. All that stuff. And other than these geeky things that we like, I hear people talking about these things all the time. Random. I'll be like at parties with different generations.
Well, so
and they're-
is your thesis here that Top Chef really got it going? And because we're talking about the most influential TV show of 2010.
I didn't think it through well enough. I'm going to go with Top Chef got it going.
Yeah, I'm reminded that I was going to talk about the psychology of things. And so let me riff on why we like these kinds of shows. Obviously, we all love food. It's sort of a weird thing, though, to think about. Like, why would you like a TV show
Right.
that talks about food, and then there's a taster, there's a judge,
Right.
and you can't taste it?
You can't even taste it.
Yeah.
You see the visuals.
Yeah. Actually, just along these lines, there's a YouTube channel that I've been watching for a while that has been totally taking off. And I think it's a Mexican woman who lives in like rural Mexico. Speaks Spanish, Latin American. I'm 90% sure she's Mexican, and she's on a ranch, and the whole YouTube channel is just her making food.
Oh,
and it's not she's not in a kitchen. She's in her outdoor kind of like a barbecue. You know, her stove is fueled by actual wood, like branches.
Sure.
Not chopped wood, but stuff gathered from around. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And she makes like, mole and all those kinds of things. And you have to turn on, well, I do. I have to turn on the translations.
Sure.
But it's just so great to see her. And all the ingredients that she uses, you can tell, are very cheaply gathered. And anyway.
By the way, I got into a similar channel that was actually an Asian grandma or something.
Okay.
And her granddaughter or something was the one doing all the filming and stuff like that.
Same with this
Yeah.
Mexican woman. It's,
Okay.
And I don't even know the name of this channel because it's in Spanish, but I think it translates to like traditional Mexican cooking on a ranch or something. I don't
wow.
know. And it's her granddaughter,
Okay.
and they just got 1 million subscribers.
Oh my God.
So they had an episode
What?
of them holding. Yeah. So now she's probably
Yeah.
like the richest person in her town.
That's crazy.
But anyway, it is sort of an interesting phenomenon about our psychology as to why we would like these cooking shows. And I think that there's a number of factors. One, it ties in the typical reality TV show shtick and appeal of you don't know what's going to happen because it's happening in the moment, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not a script, right? There's usually some sort of challenge, right? You have to make this thing in under this amount of time. And I think we get some sort of sick pleasure from watching people struggle.
Sure.
And we also get kind of a sick pleasure from watching people fail, especially when we think they deserve to fail.
Yeah, sure. And watch someone succeed, right?
And I think we also get a vicarious pleasure from watching people succeed. We identify with the person who wins, and we, don't necessarily identify with the people who lose, although that can change.
But and sorry, and there's something because when we watch a fictional movie, it is that, but like very like crafted, right?
Right.
Here, I wonder if there's a little bit of like, oh, but this is real.
Right.
It's like one of those hero movies, but for real.
Right. And I think that food, because, there's a lot of different types of these shows
Right.
that don't involve food, right? But I think there's something about food because all of us, no, even me, who was like the furthest from a cook you could possibly get, I cook things or I prepare things. And so I think it has a down-to-earth element that we can all identify with.
Totally.
We've all chopped things. We've all boiled things. We've all tried to cook something.
Well, and you're a foodie, like you like good restaurants. So
Right.
part of it is also like, oh, that looks like a good meal, and that looks
Right. And so, yeah, it must be, again, because there's so many different reality shows, and all of them are generally doing well, but there's something about the cooking shows. Maybe also knives have some sort of appeal, like violent, like because there's
Sure.
and fire. Yeah, there's something visceral
Yeah.
about that other reality shows
Interesting.
wouldn't have. Anyway, what's your number 4?
Okay, Stranger Things. That was
okay.
Stranger Things. Yeah. My number 3 is Walking Dead.
Oh yeah, of course.
Right? And, so Walking Dead is something where I have been following the graphic novel for years now, and I really like it. I'm starting to get to the point where I'm less interested, but for many, many years, I really liked it, enjoyed it. And when the first season came out of Walking Dead, I was kind of skeptical, and I watched it, and I really liked it. I was like, wow, they're doing a pretty good job bringing the essence of the comic to the. And then after that, I think season 2 started getting a little silly. Season 3 was really silly, and then I lost interest. I've heard that then eventually it got better or whatever, but I never really went back to it. But for forever, I would hear people talking about it, like
Yeah.
Walking Dead, Walking Dead, Walking Dead, Walking Dead. Yeah. And it was like all over mainstream stuff, costumes, of course, and references and things. And then there were a lot of offshoots, like the Talking Dead, right? That was the show after the show. That I think they started that.
Yeah.
And then that became a thing with other shows.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? So that was a big deal. And it was also sort of like the first time where obviously there's been cycles of zombie movies, right? But this is like a long-running zombie thing, Yeah. Normally it's like, okay, a movie comes out and 28 days later is fun for a while, and then we go away for a while. This is like years of zombies.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, obviously it was a mammoth show and influential on our culture. I know I gave up on that show way before you did. I gave up almost like before the end of the first season. I loved the first episode and was interested enough in the characters from the first couple episodes. And then by about midway through because the thing that kind of bothered me about it was that to me, there were so many squandered opportunities for like some really cool, I don't know what the graphic novel was like, but there were some opportunities I thought for some really interesting questions about, what would we really do in a situation like that?
Yeah.
And I feel like they just reduced it down to this like soap opera-y storyline that could have been transposed onto any setting. Like you could transpose it into a hospital setting or a law firm or something. It was these similar tropes that they always do in these shows. And also, I just felt like I just wasn't that interested in the characters, which of course is the main thing. And people would yell at me back when it was, first 2 or 3 seasons.
What's wrong with you?
Yeah, I remember this one student of mine was just like, I somehow admitted I wasn't watching the show anymore. And I thought, as a psychologist, I thought you would like that because it involves personality so much. And I was like, I don't know what to say to that. Other than I want to say, well,
I'm just a bad psychologist.
or how about the show just kind of sucks? I don't know. So anyway,
all right.
But I agree. Oh, what's your number 1?
No. Number 2.
Oh, number 2.
Number 2 is Breaking Bad.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Not only is it a show that I really loved, I think tons of people really loved it, but again, another breaking ground kind of situation where, first of all, what was Breaking Bad on?
Is that good, I don't know.
Well, was that also AMC or was that?
Probably.
Okay. Because I feel like, oh no, I don't know if, well, anyways, the point is, they took a lot of risks with that show.
Yeah.
It was very non-conventional. And unlike a lot of other shows where you get this feeling where they had a good idea for a first season, but then they really had it nailed from beginning to end. That's one of the few series that you can feel satisfied. Like, of course, there were a few episodes that weren't quite there, but mostly from beginning to end, I was like, yeah, that's good. That's cohesive. Also, the fact that they cast the dad from Malcolm in the Middle was so awesome. It was so great. Lots of catchphrases, things like that, and everyone was saying the catchphrases, right? And then the costumes with the yellow suits became very popular at Halloween, and it set a new bar. Sort of like when The Sopranos came out, set a new bar. Breaking Bad set a new bar. It's like, look, you can't just have like an interesting premise. Every episode has to feel like a little mini movie, and like the shows have really had to keep up with that. So I think that was a very influential show.
Yeah, the psychology in that show, there's a lot that can be said. The arc, and I only watched the first season and a half or so, but
What?
I understand the basic story. I get why people like it. I think one of the reasons why I didn't like it was because I actually treat people with chemical addiction problems, and any movie or TV show that's about drugs, I find to be like watching a 13-year-old's version of drugs. Like about oats, right? Well, imagine all the movies that you've seen that are about oats, and they're depicting oats. You're just kind of like, oh God.
In fact, I feel that way all the time, because a lot of times in a scene they'll be eating like for breakfast like oats, and I'm like, oh my God, they have so many things wrong.
Right.
So I can relate.
Right, but if you don't know anything about oats and you write a script from the perspective you don't know anything about oats for people who don't know anything about oats, then it's fine. But as a expert on drugs, when I'm watching these shows about drugs, I'm just like, and I'm also kind of an expert on drug dealers, because I've had many clients who were who were drug dealers, and I knew the reality of their life, which is not romantic. Right. I mean, and I know Breaking Bad's supposed to be like not very romantic, but it romanticizes it quite a bit. And it makes some of the drug dealers out to be these like complete psychopaths. It's a business like any other.
Right.
And there are occasional violent acts and these kinds of things. But generally speaking, you're just a business person, and it's like having a dry cleaning business or something. It's boring. It's taking calls. And the closest show that I've ever seen that really depicted the drug illicit industry was High Maintenance. It's a TV show that was on the web, and then I think HBO or Netflix or someone picked it up, and maybe YouTube.
Oh, I remember about this. Yeah.
It's this guy who drives around New York on his bike and and he gets a call and he goes to be, and he like,
and it's annoying. It's an annoying job.
Yeah, you just get the sense like the people that he has to deal with and the situations that he has to deal with. Now that show glorifies it because each sort of customer has an interesting story about them, which isn't necessarily true. But anyway, so when I watch Breaking Bad, I'm just like, crank and crack and meth, these are really not very sexy drugs. The situations that people get into with those drugs are not very interesting when you really learn the psychosis that often kicks in with these people. That's not very appealing to see.
Right.
The physical problems, the way your life falls apart. And again, just how mundane drug dealing and drug making actually is.
So you probably felt similarly when you were watching Game of Thrones, because having read so much Lord of the Rings, you're like, dragons don't work this way.
Well,
and like ogres really aren't that tall. And
so if I lived in the Dark Ages, then I might look at these kinds of shows and be like, being a king is actually really boring. You know what I mean? It's not so. Because like Wolf of Wall Street, it's a classic example where I'm sitting in the audience at a packed theater, and this Scorsese movie, and everyone's loving, stellar ratings, Rotten Tomatoes. Everyone's laughing their ass off.
I laugh my ass off
when Leo is so
Incapacitated by the
on
drug, yeah.
barbiturates that he can't even drive his car or walk. And I'm just sitting there going, this is a sad depiction of I know what drugs actually do to people.
Right.
This is not funny. This is not a funny situation. This is a tragic, horrible situation that this person is going to regret the rest of their life.
Right.
And these drugs don't even necessarily make you feel that good. Like
Right.
after a while, you take drugs over and over. And eventually, it's just sort of like trying to maintain your life. It's not sexy, and
So,
it's
like,
not interesting.
When you watched American Pie, you were probably like, I've treated people that have these like sexual misattachments to fruit and fruit pies. This is not funny. Like, this is serious.
Actually, we're going to do an episode later about how some people fall in love with objects sexually and romantically.
Good. And we'll bring up American. By the way, so my number one is Game of Thrones, which was on your list too. I put it as number one because, like we said, it was just like nonstop Game of Thrones all over the place. Okay. But side note, recently my business actually split up, and I got the government split it into two, and now we're just called Hall.
Okay, interesting. So when getting back to Breaking Bad, I think another psychological aspect to this show that is appealing to people. This is the original thing I wanted to talk about before I went on a long rant to try to justify the fact that I haven't watched it. I mean, maybe if I watched it, I'd find the appeal season 2 or 3. My brother says, like, you got to watch it.
I think you would.
Okay. Oh, fine. But part of me just wants to die with people. The last thing that someone says to me is like, you haven't seen Breaking Bad? And I hear Better Call Saul is awesome.
I never did finish that. I started, but I didn't finish.
Okay. Yeah. So anyway, the psychological aspects of this show, obviously there's many. Grief, what happens to someone when they're diagnosed with a terminal illness, the way this family system operates where the wife is sort of the alpha and the husband is sort of the beta.
Right.
And how the progression of his I don't know, because he begins the story with him just kind of trudging through life.
Yeah, letting life lead him by the pinky.
Yeah. And then he, in an act of desperation, because, and I think most people understand the premise of the show, he's diagnosed with terminal cancer, and he's like, well, with my last, I might as well be useful and actually get like a good amount of, or he needs money to pay his medical bills.
He needs money to pay his medical bills,
right.
And he's going to leave his family with nothing.
Right. So he wants to both help his family out, because as he's dying with some money, and then he actually discovers himself and like, wait, I can take the life by the horns and actually like,
right.
And then it gets worse and he starts to justify his action as a slippery slope into immorality and amorality and violence and psychopathy. And it raises the question of like, well, was he always a psychopath and he just never really had the venue to enact that?
Right.
Or did the lifestyle beat out the morality in that human being? There's a lot of questions in there.
And questions like the complicity of those around him, because the without spoiling anything, like the wife starts in one place, but because we all have to make little choices along the way,
right.
And those little choices might end up putting us in a very different moral place down the line that we would have never even considered to begin with.
Right. And another thing that maybe I hope it helps people to understand, I doubt it really put this point strongly, which is that the vast majority of crimes are committed by desperate people, not by people who are trying to fuck people over.
Yeah, look at Aladdin. He was just like one move ahead of the something, ahead of the pack.
On that note, let's take a break, and when we get back, let's talk about our top 5 favorite TV shows of the last decade. What do you say, Berto?
Let's do it.
Okay, Berto, so if what's-his-face, the lead character of Breaking Bad, what's his name?
Oh,
Heisenberg.
Heisenberg.
If Heisenberg were to convince the listeners right now who aren't patrons to become patrons, what might he say?
Man,
and you can either do it in Heisenberg or
No, I'll do it.
Is it Jesse? Is that his name?
No. I'm definitely going to go Heisenberg. It's challenging because it's been a while. But anyways, here we go. Listen. I have been stepped on. My van blew up. I'm sitting here. I don't know any of you people, but I got to tell you. You need to go on that website and you need to sign up. It's very urgent that you do so to be a patron. And you have to be able to say at the end of the day, I am the one who patrons Psychology in Seattle.
All right, so top 5, Berto, give me your top 5.
All right, let's see. Number 5, Rachel Maddow.
Oh.
I know a lot of more extreme lefties are like, oh, she was just obsessed with Russia the whole time. She's been right from the start. I'm not going to go into it because I know people don't like politics, but all I'm going to say is she does amazing investigative work. Every show, I learned so much about so many things. I really, really like her show.
All right, number 4.
Number 4, Rick and Morty. Rick and Morty is like a discovery that it felt like discovering a little hidden gem in the world, you know?
So getting back to Rachel Maddow, have you seen every episode?
Well, no, but I watch as much as I can.
Like you record it or something?
No, they have MSNBC posts on YouTube.
Oh.
Yeah.
So you watch a lot of Rachel Maddow?
A lot of Rachel Maddow, yeah.
Like still?
Yeah, definitely still. More so now, this year more than ever.
Have you listened to her podcast, Bagman?
I have not yet, but but that's not surprising because I don't listen to that many podcasts. But yeah, I know what it's about.
Okay, number 3.
And I want to buy her book. I hear her book's really good. All right, so sorry, Rick and Morty. Rick and Morty for me is like this amazing, perfect little combination of humor. Having been a huge fan of Back to the Future, I was very intrigued when I first saw the drawings, and I had heard about it, but I hadn't really watched it.
It's really not anything like Back to the Future, though.
No, but it's influenced by Back to the Future.
Yeah, but when people say that, I'm like,
Meaning the characters were literally
I know.
A spoof of Doc and Marty.
But I saw 10 episodes of Rick and Morty before someone mentioned that to me, and I was like, oh, I could kind of see it, but it's its own creation.
Oh, of course. No. Of course. But time travel / dimensional travel, crazy white-haired scientist whose name is, Rick versus Doc, and then the spazzy younger the apprentice who's either Marty or Morty, of course. But anyways. But the thing is, I had seen the designs. I was like, oh, that sounds kind of funny. And one day Mitch came over and he's like, dude, we got to sit there and watch this. Like, this is amazing. And so we marathoned the first season and I was like smitten. I was so into this show that I even bought the little Pocket Mortys game for my phone and I maxed it out, collecting all the Mortys that I could. Just obsessed. I have t-shirts of the show. I have a huge poster that's one of those things that when you move one way, it changes, and it's a Pickle Rick one. Oh, just love it. Gravity Falls is my number 3.
What's that?
Gravity Falls is a Disney TV show that had 4 seasons. And it was made for kids, but very appealing for adults as well.
What's it about?
It's about this brother and sister who go to spend a summer with their great uncle Stan in Gravity Falls. But Gravity Falls is this mysterious town in Oregon.
It's a cartoon.
It's a cartoon, yeah. Mysterious town in Oregon where all sorts of weird stuff happens.
Is it like Adventure Time?
Yeah, actually, definitely along those lines.
Because it looks like Adventure Time.
Yeah. And it's just like super layered. Each episode builds on this greater arc, a mystery arc. And
well, that's a surprising pick.
Yeah,
you got some surprising picks.
I loved every episode. I've watched it through probably 5 times. Love it.
All right.
I even have the book I'm writing has some references to it. Number 2. This is probably a little off the beaten path, but Nathan For You.
What?
Are you familiar with Nathan For You?
No.
Okay. So Nathan For You is Comedy Central. This guy, Nathan Fielder, it's supposed to be a reality show where he's a business consultant and he comes in and helps businesses do better. But in reality, he's like, the the show is the meta joke of him not really being a competent business advisor at all.
It's crazy. This show has been on Comedy Central for the past like 7 years.
Yes, yeah.
And I've never even heard of it before.
Oh, you should watch, especially the early seasons. Really entertaining. He basically, it's kind of like a Borat sort of situation where he comes and tries to help these companies with outlandish ideas. For example, there's this ice cream shop and it's kind of struggling, and he's like, well, maybe you need to try, new flavors. And then he's like, what about if you did poop flavor? And the guy's like, no,
Is
that would
it
be terrible.
like a real ice cream shop?
It's a real ice cream shop.
So it's like Borat.
It's like Borat. Now, the people know they're being filmed, and so they know they're on a business reality show.
But in the same way that Borat,
Right.
his people knew they were being filmed, but
Right.
they thought they were on a
They
show.
were on a more legit sort of show.
A legit Kazakhstan travel show.
Right.
And this, I think maybe I have seen an
Now,
episode or two.
I can't claim much about the latter seasons because who knows how hard it gets for him to not be known,
Yeah.
But certainly in the first couple of seasons.
He could have pranked me. I wouldn't have known.
Fair enough. And he's just hilarious. His brand of humor is like super straight. He's like, there's this ongoing theme too where he's super self-conscious and like he doesn't think highly of himself, but he tries to portray like he does. But that's like the character.
Yeah. So the psychology of shows like this, obviously Borat. I was watching Borat, the British show, on DVD. I think.
Right. Like what the Ali G show.
Ali G show from what is it?
Like
early
2000,
early
right?
2000s
Yeah.
or something. Yeah, maybe like 2002 on. And I just thought it was the Ali G, Borat, Bruno,
Right.
all of his characters. I just thought were hilarious, and it was totally groundbreaking at the time, and to some extent, still kind of is. There's some very questionable humor involved, obviously.
And probably some stuff that wouldn't fly as much now in terms of cultural sensitivity.
Yeah, but at the same time, the vast majority of it is making fun of people like him. Now, the worst of it is the Borat because you're basically making fun of foreigners. But what he's trying to do is he's trying to make fun of a particular sort of bigoted foreigner, But he's also making fun of rural people. in general.
If I were to defend it, I would say what he's actually doing a send up of is the Western, specifically the U.S. and maybe Britain impression of what that bigoted foreigner would be and their acceptance of it.
Right, exactly. Like when he goes to some rural American bar and he sings a song about
Horrible thing about the Jewish people.
throwing Jews in the
Right.
well, and all of the
bar
patrons
singing along and clapping.
or that's the way they make it seem anyway. Anyway, so the psychology involved in that, I think, is one, we love to laugh at certain kinds of people.
Right.
Two, he often is making fun of people in real time,
Right.
which is both hilarious because we get to see someone make a fool out of themselves,
Right.
but also it's sort of like horror movies because we're cringing the whole time. It's sort of like Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Yeah, totally.
It's like you're like, oh my god,
Yeah, I don't want to watch this.
I don't want to watch what he's they're gonna figure it out, and like he'll walk up to some, he'll be doing a show with some regular mainstream American white guy, and he kisses him on the lips,
Right.
or a police officer, and he just kisses him on the lips, and you're like, oh god, what's the cop gonna do?
Yeah.
So there's some kind of tension and release that we get from that. It's like, oh my god, tension, and then he survives, and we get that. And,
Right.
And it's a similar thing with a lot of
The horror movies.
like spa treatments, actually, or other kinds of somatic treatments where you've actually done some of these treatments
definitely.
where people will, shove their thumbs into your eyeballs.
And you feel vulnerable as hell.
Yeah, and you're in a lot of pain, you're in a lot of discomfort. And when you are released from that discomfort, one, your life is much better than it was 3 seconds ago.
Right.
Two, our body releases a bunch of endorphins to counteract that kind of thing, and it releases that through cringe and horror films too. When we're cringing, our body and our nervous system notices that we're suffering, and it says we need to sort of counteract that a little bit because it can be overwhelming. And then when we have the release, it's almost like a high.
Yeah, totally.
And I think that shows like this, Nathan for You, might provide that.
And one thing I'll say about Nathan For You, it's a lot less about making fun of his mark, and it's more about making this meta point about how far could the ridiculousness of our human interactions be taken? Because, when we're interacting with a business or with someone in a professional setting, we tend to be artificial, right? And so it's like pushing the boundaries. Like, well, what if this professional is telling you this crazy advice? How far would you go?
What did they say with the poop ice cream?
Oh, well, the guy's like, well, I think it's going to be terrible idea. But, whatever, we'll try. I mean, it's not real poop. It's like, no, it's not real. It's just taste. It's like, okay. So he goes and works with a chemist to come up with this company that actually comes up with flavors.
God.
And then they actually put a promotion and people come and taste it. And they're like, most of them, they're like, that tastes odd. And some of them are like, I sort of like it, but not sure. And then some people actually, with like one or two, they're like, this kind of tastes like what I would imagine poop tastes like. And then you're like, well, how do they know? The thing I was going to say about him, though, these little subtleties that I love, there's episodes where he's trying to do something where he's, let's say his mark or whoever is the female. And he's saying, okay, now we're going to do a little role playing. So pretend I'm maybe a date that you're going out with or whatever. And so they're role playing. And then he goes like, oh, well, do you like me? And then she'll go role playing. Oh, yes, of course I do. But then he'll be like, kind of break the fourth wall of their engagement and go like, are you saying that in character or do you mean that? And then the girl's like, well, no, I mean, we're role playing, right? Oh, yeah. But it's like these like self-conscious, self-aware things that he injects into it. And it's great. It's like very subtle and it makes you feel bad for this fictitious character that he's representing. I love it. All right. And then my number one, Black Mirror. So I did put Black Mirror, but in this list because I felt, I think that show has given me the most to think about and talk about and just geek out on.
And just think about like when the next season comes out, how happy you're going to feel.
Totally.
Yeah. My number 5 is Black Mirror. So my top 5 is pretty predictable. Yours was not. Number 5, Black Mirror. Number 4, Stranger Things.
Yeah.
There's so many things about Stranger Things that I enjoy. I understand if people don't like that show, honestly, because it's very much geared towards the 80s. It's a childish show. It's a
Goonies kind of
right, a Goonies, E.T. Sort of show that it's not really geared towards adult sort of sensibilities, I would say, in the way that Black Mirror is, for example. Yeah. But there's so many things about Stranger Things. I love the characters.
And this last season, I enjoyed so much.
Yeah.
I was going to I would have been my number 6 maybe.
Yeah. Stacey and I went as Steve and Robin.
You guys look great.
Yeah. Number 3 is Parks and Recreation.
I've never seen it. I've only heard the best things.
So did you like The Office? The American. So The American Office is one of my favorite shows. Mm-hmm. I remember liking it. I remember loving the British version too, but it's so short, Yeah. The American Office is also funny, but the characters, it makes it so, the inside jokes that sort of develop over time. Right. And but I think Parks and Rec is even better of that genre. And the characters, the things that they got into, Amy Poehler, Chris Pratt, all those people. Rashida Jones, what's his face? Anyway, I just thought it was a great show. Number 2 is Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
When each season came out from the beginning, because I read the books prior to the show ever coming out, I just loved it. Yeah. I sort of wish that no one else, I sort of wish that the amount of people who watched the first season were the only people who watched the show throughout, because I feel like since everyone was watching this show, I feel like a lot of people who probably wouldn't like the show to begin with watched it anyway.
Ooh, I wonder if the ending seasons would have been better as a result because they didn't have to like deliver to the biggest audience.
Right.
And, you know.
I mean, I hadn't thought about that, but that's quite possible. And or the budget would have been limited, so they couldn't do big set pieces, and they'd have to do more story. The amount of sort of what I would consider to be just like opinions about Game of Thrones that I just did not resonate with me from like halfway through season 6 on really just kind of degraded the experience for me kind of because I was watching it thinking like, oh God, I'm going to hear about that tomorrow on the internet. And, you know, it's not a perfect show. No show is.
No show
but
can be.
Can you think of a better fantasy show?
Nope.
Can you think of a better fantasy creation? I think Game of Thrones is better than Lord of the Rings in a lot of ways. When I rewatch Lord of the Rings now, it's sort of like...
I don't know. That's a tall word. I mean, I got to say, I haven't seen it in a long, long time.
I would rewatch it.
But dude, man, my experience, at least that first movie...
Yeah.
It was so good.
Are you kidding me? Like, I grew up with these books, and to have them never put on the silver screen in a good way, was to have that. I mean, I binged. I've told you, I watched for Christmas. I would ask for the extended 4 DVD version, and I would watch the featurettes. I listened to all 4 of the commentaries.
Yeah,
there were different groups of people, and I loved it. But anyway, my point is Game of Thrones is number 2. Especially when I think about the 2010s as a TV show that sort of summarizes my TV watching in 2010s. Game of Thrones is a big part of that. And number 1, The Americans.
Oh, wait. I haven't seen The Americans. Is this the...
Spies.
The Spies?
In the 80s.
What channel is it? Or like what is this? Amazon?
FX? I believe, FX. So I'm not quite sure about that, but it's on Amazon now. The Americans, it's like Stranger Things because it totally involves the 80s. But
so I would love it.
And it's like 10 or 11 episodes per season, and I think it's 7 seasons.
7 seasons?
Something like that, yeah.
Holy crap.
And the acting is awesome. It's hardly ever cheesy.
Oh, wow.
The missions that the spies go on are interesting. The tension, the characters, the writing, the involvement of history where they actually incorporate things that likely happened.
Oh man.
It's just an amazing show.
So
There's some questionable things about the final episode. I liked it, especially the arc between, and this isn't a spoiler, is it's a husband-wife team, and the husband-wife, they live next to an FBI agent who is in charge of investigating them, investigating Russian spies.
Right.
And they are friends throughout the entire especially the husband and him are really good friends throughout all the seasons. And the story arc Stan is the FBI agency. The story arc involving
sounds like Breaking Bad-ish.
It's so good, right?
Okay.
Honorable mentions past decade. Fleabag almost made it into my top 5. I thought Fleabag was
super good.
Was really good, especially the first time watching. When I rewatched it, I kind of saw things coming, but the first time watching for Fleabag, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. I can watch I can pop in one of those episodes and watch them and enjoy it.
I'm surprised I didn't put that one on my list. Actually,
I'm guessing it's similar with Parks and Rec. Actually, I'm guessing when I'm 85 years old, I'm still gonna watch episodes of It's Always Sunny and Parks and Rec.
I gotta be honest, like I'm kind of regretting not putting that one because of all the shows, including Curb Your Enthusiasm, which I absolutely loved, certainly those first few seasons, but I had never laughed for so long and so hard as some of those Sunny episodes.
Yeah, I mean,
oh my god!
Not only are the jokes funny, but the way that these guys act because I've seen behind the scenes, like the bloopers. They have a general premise and they have a script of sorts, but they improv a lot.
Yeah, right now.
A lot of it. And in the bloopers, you see them, like Charlie Day will come up with a new line. and you just see the other guys just dying laughing because as you know, they're all writers, they're all comedy writers, and so as they're doing this scene, they're about, I bet you this would be a funnier line, and so the way that they edit the show is they take the best bits out of these little scenarios that they create, and also that they weren't satisfied with just kind of pumping out the same sorts of episodes, that they, especially in the latter seasons, they decided to really kind of stretch things a little bit. And like,
and get super meta. Some of their episodes are so awesome because they're like a send off of a different kind of type of show. Like, remember the one with the Seinfeld, like where they were basically like recreating Seinfeld bits, and it was so self-aware.
Or Lethal Weapon.
Oh my god. And the other thing that I just love, because Curb Your Enthusiasm is also super improv,
right?
But in this one, I think I get the sense that like what you were saying, which is improv, but then they select the best.
Well, and they have a script. So Curb Your Enthusiasm, the first few seasons, I think was like It's Always Sunny in that. So the way that Curb Your Enthusiasm, the way that Larry David sets up his scenes is he's like, okay, you're going to be sitting in my seat when I return from the bathroom.
Right.
And I'm going to want you to get out of the seat.
And that's the extent of the setup.
And that's the setup. And then they just go for it.
Yeah.
Well, that only can last so long before by season 8, you're like, you see it coming a mile away.
Right.
And when I watch some of those scenes, especially knowing how they construct the scenes, I'm like, none of these characters really know what they're supposed to be doing, and all they do is essentially just kind of argue, like like the scene will be like, Larry David's like, hey, what are you doing? You're in my seat. He'd be like, well, I don't know, no one was sitting here when I got here. And Larry David would be like, well, I was sitting there earlier. And then the other guy's like, well, I don't know what to tell you. And then they just repeat that sort of that they just escalate that.
You're making me laugh though, because that's just, I think I know what you're getting at exactly.
Whereas It's Always Sunny, there'll be like there'll be 5 other layers,
and there's a thread. Yeah, but I don't want to go too hard here because like those first few seasons of Curb,
right?
Oh my god!
But one would argue that the first few seasons of Curb
inspired,
had more of a construction to the scene, more layers.
Yeah,
it's probably a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Than later seasons where I think Larry David got lazy.
I will not disagree. I don't care so much for the latter seasons. I will also say, not everyone that he improv'd with was as strong, because he's amazing.
Yeah.
And like Richard is great. Like the scenes between them are some of the best comedy gold.
Yeah.
Not all the actors and actresses that he had on the show were always as strong. So there were scenes where you're still enjoying Larry, but the other person is running out of like good comebacks or good things, and that's what starts making the scene not feel awkward in that good way, but feel awkward as in like, this is getting boring. And I felt that happen more in the latter seasons for sure. But anyways, I don't mean to put down Curb, because certainly Curb influenced things like Sunny and
other honorable mentions, The Office. It sort of dipped into the 2010s. The OJ documentary I thought was awesome. 30 Rock also dipped into the 2010s. The Clone Wars, Star Wars, the cartoon, I really like that show a lot. Obviously, Trailer Park Boys. Modern Family. I really loved Modern Family.
Oh, yeah. I'm surprised you...
Me and my wife have watched every episode at least twice, maybe 3 times. I just think it's hilarious. It's one of the last shows on like it's on regular TV, I think, right?
Wait, is Ed, what's his name in that?
The guy from
Al Bundy?
Al Bundy, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
He's in Married with Children.
Yeah.
So he's in that show. Is he the dad?
He's the grandfather.
Oh, the grandfather. Okay.
Why?
Well, I'm just thinking it's funny because he was in one of the best, like, satirical family shows.
It's nothing like that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it has nothing. It has no ties to that.
Because I loved Married with Children.
Yeah. I mean, I watched it when I was 21.
I'm not saying it aged well. I'm just saying not only because of the content, but the humor. But at the time, I was in high school, and I loved it.
Yeah, I didn't really like it. I thought, I mean, at the time, again, you had 3 channels, so it's like, what else are you going to watch?
Do?
But I remember just feeling like the negativity on that show was just a little much for me.
Well, sure.
I know that's
Yeah.
the idea, but I just and also it became such a thing. It became such a they had such a following,
Yeah,
and the audience would just cackle.
Yeah.
And I was like, it wasn't that funny.
Well,
Yeah.
laugh tracks in general got out of hand.
No, I think
right?
it was a live audience.
Sure. Well, sorry. I didn't mean laugh tracks. I meant shows with laugh in them.
But I think
Got kind of out of hand.
well, no, I think shows with live audiences that didn't have a sort of rabid cult following, like for example, Jimmy Kimmel, for example, his audience,
Yeah.
they're not rabid. They laugh normal. They laugh like normal human beings. David Letterman in the last 5 to 10 years of his career, his audience were rabid. It was almost like no matter what David Letterman said, they were going to clap. It bothered the crap out of it. Every little joke that David Letterman said not only got a laugh, but an ovation.
Well,
And
I-
so that's my point is
I
like,
got to be honest. I never, even when I was a kid, I never liked laugh, whether it was tracks or live. I never liked the laugh because I always felt like it's like, you don't get to pick when I laugh, damn it. I'm going to laugh whenever I want. Oh, okay, that was funny, but still.
yeah, but research.
I don't know, maybe it was a...
But
like
research shows that when you add a laugh track, even if people know it's fake, it will actually make people think it's funnier.
I'm sure that's true. I just remember, like in the late 80s, the shows that I actually liked, but I still was always bothered by laughing.
Yeah.
By other people that I don't know laughing.
Really. And Bob's Burgers.
Oh, yeah.
So I want to just quickly go over this CNET article written by Adam Kuzer. She has number 30, Saturday Night Live, which I think, is very influential in a
Sure.
certain way.
Sure.
I watch it on YouTube as soon as
I
it
watched
comes
a lot
out.
of clips on YouTube from
Yeah,
SNL.
I actually really enjoy it. People talk about like the good old days when it was really funny. I think every season has its shining moments, and I think that those moments are still occurring.
I got to disagree with
Every
you.
season has always had duds, that's for sure.
I have to disagree with you because late 90s and early 2000s, I can't remember the exact because it was before Will Ferrell. There was a period of time because I would never miss an SNL starting in like 93 probably. No, 91. Never miss an SNL. Avid, rabid watcher. And right around the late 90s, I was like done. I was like, this is no longer funny.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously haven't done.
But then it came back.
haven't-
I'm not denying that it came back, and there's been some amazing seasons.
But I think even during those years, there are some shining moments
Maybe.
that aren't usually. People tend to talk about it's like those seasons were terrible, and it's just like there's probably some good moments in there. 29 Key and Peele, which
oh yeah,
I would say is a huge
Very
show.
influential.
I mean, Jordan Peele, his career is totally taken off.
although was it Chappelle was like, oh, a nice way to build a show from my show. You know? I know he was a little salty, but
Chappelle bothers me actually. Like his latest stand-up,
yeah, I watched it.
I did not. It's actually past two stand-ups I thought wasn't funny, and I thought took cheap shots at people that didn't need to be cheap shotted.
I don't disagree with that. I did find it funny,
I didn't. I was
but
just like, I was like,
I've never thought his stand-up was anywhere near as good as what he did with his show.
I never even thought his show was that funny, to be
I
honest.
did like his show a lot.
Like again, I thought his show had a similar rabid following that Married with Children had, which was this element of like, this is gonna sound bad, but I think there are a lot of. I'm just referencing the people in my circle in the '90s who loved Married with Children, and there's one of my close friends who loved Married with Children and loved the David Chappelle show.
Okay.
And he had a bone to pick. He was a white guy who had a bone to pick with like certain groups of people.
Okay.
And I felt like both of those shows sort of tapped into that energy a little bit.
Oh.
And me watching this show, I was like, okay, I guess it's not bad. I mean,
Sure.
it's not like terrible TV, but I don't understand why you're like such a rabid fan of the show. You know,
I
it's
will
like,
grant you
okay,
that-
it's kind of funny, but why do you have posters of this fucking show?
I will grant you that the following for Chappelle Show was way overblown.
Right.
But I did find it funny. I just felt like when I watch his stand-up, which I also find funny, but I actually don't find it as funny as his skits. And I think his skits did influence the Key and Peele skits, but Key and Peele, in my opinion, is better. Like, I like Key and Peele
Way
better.
better. Just, I mean, the shit that Key and Peele tackle in half of their skits are groundbreaking. They did, their skit on they're both slaves.
Yeah, I've seen
They're
it.
both on the slave
Yeah,
block,
it's great.
and they're like, "Oh, this is bullshit." And then they're like, "How come they're not picking me?"
They're not picking me. Like,
Yeah, and another skit where they are they're in a apocalypse where aliens have invaded, and they have guns and they're walking through the streets, and this white business guy comes up and comes out of the shadows. And is like, oh, thank God, thank God, two black guys have come to save me with guns. And they're like, oh, obviously an alien, because if he was a human, he'd be scared of us. And so they shoot him, and just that kind of thing. Where and then this white girl comes out of the shadows and is terrified of them because it's two black guys with
And
guns.
like, okay, good.
Okay, good. You're a human.
I know. I remember that one.
And then just, I mean, not only obvious racism sorts of elements that they, but just the observation that they make on the human race through so many of their skits.
Totally.
Like the Noise skit. I mean, Noise. Do you know
Oh
that
yeah,
skit?
the guy who still says noise.
No, it's like they're in a like a breakdancing circle, and this one guy is like noise.
Everything everyone does noise.
Yeah, but everyone turns around and likes him. They're like, oh, that's cool. That guy
cool.
said noise, And then this other guy starts noticing, oh, he said noise. I'm gonna say noise. And then everyone's like, oh, that's cool that you said noise. And then the original noise guy is like, hey, I'm the noise guy. And so they start having this noise off. And I don't know, there's just something so brilliant about, even though I've never been the noise guy, you
can relate.
I can relate. Yeah. It's Key and Peele just.
I don't know if you saw one where it was, this guy is telling a story or whatever. I forget the thing. And the other guy, no matter what he says, he like dismisses him, he's like, oh, okay, whatever. And he's being super sarcastic.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean?
They're like nerds at like
Oh, yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah, and he's like, okay.
Okay. And he tells all the different
Yeah, or
variants of
there's
it.
awkward. He's like, no, it's not awkward. You're making it awkward. All righty
right.
then. Let's change this. Yeah. And then just little things like that.
Yeah.
Or the episode where they're giving a TED talk to men about women having their periods.
I didn't see that one.
Oh my God.
Oh, geez.
It's these two sort of like, I don't know, they look like pimps or something. They're dressed like pimps, and they have this TED talk to men about like when women bleed from their crotches. It's like this weird way of trying to make men be more sensitive to menstruation. Anyway, 13 Reasons Why. They're obviously a pretty big influence on our culture.
I guess so.
And for young people, you'd be hard-pressed to find a teenager who hasn't watched at least the first season, I would imagine.
I don't remember, because I didn't listen to your podcast, but did you net out positive influence or negative influence on that?
So at the time, there was a lot of outcry about, because it's about
suicide.
A girl who kills herself. And I remember thinking like, well, I mean, because there were people saying like, this show should be banned and that sort of thing. And I was like, well, let's calm down. Might this show actually motivate some people to kill themselves? Or might be the final straw that, sort of motivates someone? Maybe. And that's obviously tragic and horrible. But the fact that we have such a fucked up society around suicide anyway. We don't talk about it. We don't reach out to people enough. There's not enough services. There's stigma about mental health. Like we're to blame for the fact that so many people don't seek help and don't know where to turn and feel isolated.
Sure.
Like it's the basis, half of it is our fault.
Yeah.
And then to say like, this show is to blame, it's like, well, this show is at least raising awareness, which is actually a good thing. It's saying like, look, suicide among teenagers is a thing.
Yeah.
And so this show is popular, and so it raises like, maybe all of us, if you're worried about your kids following suit, maybe this is a prompt for you to actually pay attention to your kids and start to get them to to go to mental health and to vote for legislatures who actually promote these kinds of things. And so at the time, I was like, well, we don't really know the effect it had on suicide. Maybe it had an effect, but overall, I thought it was a good thing. Then we actually had the data come out, because it takes a while for the data to reveal itself. And what they found was there was a 29% increase in suicide among teenagers in the month following the release of the show.
Yeah.
And
I remember that.
it was mainly for boys, actually.
So my objections to the show, and I certainly don't say ban anything, but really more about ratings, things like that. But my main objection to the show is that it wasn't a show geared towards sort of adults and parents, and like it was definitely geared towards teenagers.
Oh yeah.
And that's what, and I don't just mean like teenagers should watch this it was stylized in a way that would appeal and
Now,
therefore glorify it a bit,
Right. Well, because the premise of the show was about a girl who had already killed herself.
Yeah.
And she sent out these 13 cassette sides to various different people to listen to.
Right.
And each side of a cassette was her talking about another person who influenced her to kill herself.
Right.
So someone bullied her, and someone raped her, and someone didn't listen to her when she tried to tell them about something. And so it was her way of essentially getting revenge. You could say it was like, the suicide note of being like, I did this because you didn't blah, blah, blah. Or I did this because you were an asshole or something.
But it was this portrayal of like how clever she was to arrange all the tapes just so, and that when they would be released and when...
Yeah. And in the end, as a viewer and as the people getting the cassettes, they, through this act of suicide, they now sort of respect her more.
Right.
She was heard. Her voice was heard because she killed herself. And that's obviously not the message that is very positive.
Yeah, like the extreme example, which I realize is way worse, but imagine if they did a like sort of a school shooting show where they made you at the end of the show be like, oh, I guess I see the
I killed half of the school student body because of these 13 reasons.
Yeah, and follow the hunt. And anyways.
Yeah. Right. So, but there's a lot of horrible things on TV, really. There's a lot of violence. There's a lot of murder. There's a lot of rape. There's, so to point to this show. But again, when we look at the increase.
Turns out it did have a.
Now, it's not necessarily causation. There could have been a lot of other factors, and there is a sort of monthly fluctuation, but it stands to reason, again, with how popular the show was.
Right.
Now, one could argue that those people would have killed themselves in a later month or something, but actually data doesn't necessarily support that either. Netflix has since altered the graphic suicide scene from the first season and also increased the warnings about the subject matter, sort of the disclaimers before the episode.
I know that in this case, it turned out great for the suicide victim, but...
Right, but I suspect that's probably not enough because you'd have to alter the whole premise of the show, the plot, to...
Isn't there another season?
There's been at least two, I think 2 seasons. Number 27, Silicon Valley.
Oh, yeah.
Which...
I mean, yeah.
Which I loved the first season and a half, and then after that was just not very entertained.
So I was with you for sure in the first run. What I think I talked about this before. What happened to me is, definitely loved the first season, and I still think it is definitely the best. Of course, it's very cohesive, all these things. I started using Silicon Valley as my white noise while I would be doing
oat things,
oat work, filling out oat reports and things like that. Back then, we were one company. And unfortunately, fortunately, I should say, because I was watching it so much, I started getting more and more attached to the latter seasons, and then I actually really liked it. So maybe it was a little Stockholm syndrome, but so I've watched the first episode of the new season, and I'm pretty into it, and blah blah blah.
So I want to talk about T.J. Miller because this is a psychological bent to this. So I did a little deep dive into his history, and this is all from the internet, so I'm not really sure. But prior to Silicon Valley, in 2010, he had brain surgery, which removed a small part of his frontal lobe. Did you know that?
What?
Yeah.
T.J. Miller?
Yeah. He was on a podcast talking about this, and from memory, he was in, I think, Australia or something, and he was shooting a movie or a TV show, and he had like some neurological symptoms. He goes to the hospital, they diagnose him, and they say, the only solution here is we have to remove part of your brain.
Oh my God.
Which I think is a key element to the rest of the story that is not often discussed.
No, I've not heard this at all.
Yeah, your frontal lobe is associated with your decision-making, your emotional regulation, And so now it's unclear if that was the reason, but, I think he said something like a tablespoon piece of his brain, which is quite a bit. So fast forward to 2016, he's arrested for allegedly assaulting an Uber driver. They were having a debate about Donald Trump, and T.J. Miller hates Donald Trump, and so he assaulted an Uber driver. 2017, T.J. Miller sent his former friend, a film critic, Danielle Salzman, a lengthy email using transphobic slurs. So I'm guessing like tranny, I'm guessing those kinds of words. He was also reported to have used her previous name and called her a man. So I don't know this, but Danielle Salzman might be trans herself. I'm not sure. So he had T.J. Miller had this very, transphobic email exchange that was written evidence of his douchebaggery. Same year, 2017, allegations against T.J. Miller from his time in college 20 years ago resurfaced, part of the Me Too movement called the Weinstein effect. So in that whole thing, and lots of people were being implicated. T.J. Miller, a story from his past cropped up, in which he became violent with her during a sexual encounter. He allegedly choked, shook, and punched her in the mouth, all without her consent.
Oh my God.
So that's before his brain surgery.
Yeah.
2018.
Oh, that's before the brain surgery.
Right, well before.
Okay.
But again, maybe
he might have already had problems.
Maybe he already had a problem with his brain. 2, maybe he's a douchebag and a psychopath. 3, maybe the allegation wasn't exactly, honest. Who knows? It's hard to tell. It's rare that people come forward with things like that and lie about it. But 2018, plus again, the way that it's described, it's like it's hard to imagine a situation where it's like, well, he choked and punched her. That's a normal thing to happen, right. 2018, federal charges, fake bomb threat made while he was on a train.
Oh, I do remember that.
He's on a train, and he made an emergency call and reported that a female passenger had a bomb in her bag.
Because he was getting back to her, right?
Authorities evacuated passengers and searched the train. No evidence of any explosive device was found. According to witnesses, he appeared to be heavily intoxicated and involved in a hostile exchange with a woman who was sitting in a front row from him in the first-class car, in a different row. So he was in some sort of fight with this woman,
right? And
he called 911 and said she had a bomb. If convicted, he could face up to 5 years in prison.
Yeeks.
And so that was recently. We don't know the outcome of that yet. So these things were all part of the whole, T.J. Miller being fired from Silicon Valley, and he's no longer on the show. And he was perhaps at least the number 2, if not arguably the number 1 character on that show.
Dude, no question, especially first couple seasons. his interaction with the main guy, I guess, who is really the main guy, whatever. But you're right. Like, he was the funniest. Like, that was the funniest stuff. You could argue Dinesh. Dinesh is really freaking funny, actually.
Yeah, all those guys are hilarious. Number 26 on the list, Blackish. Explores
Never did see that.
It's a real traditional sitcom, but from the African American experience.
But like they're light skinned African Americans or something.
I think they might reference themselves as being that way.
Because isn't that the whole thing? Like, that's why it's called Blackish, I think.
You know, I haven't watched enough of it to know the answer to that question, but I found it to be entertaining. You know, it's in the same kind of genre, I think, as Modern Family, that sort of classic sitcom kind of format. Veep with Julia Louis-Dreyfus. She was won a lot of Emmy awards for it. I've seen it a little bit and thought it was enjoyable.
Yeah.
24 Arrow, which I cannot believe is on this list. Yeah.
You mean the DC Arrow?
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't see it, but
yeah.
Okay.
Why in the world would? And then 23 Daredevil.
Okay, yeah. No. I will give it to Daredevil. Now, I don't know about 23 most influential, but Daredevil kickstarted TV shows on streaming services for Netflix about superheroes.
Well, maybe that's why it's on it, because Arrow was actually before Daredevil.
Right, but those were all like network TV.
Right. Oh,
Yeah.
So maybe that's why Arrow
Like
is on the
Smallville
list.
was obviously a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I
And Daredevil was really good. Did you like Daredevil?
No, I don't like those. The character, and we've talked about this before, the character of Daredevil, similar to the Book of Eli, and also like Zatoichi.
Oh no, are you gonna get into like how it's unrealistic?
Yeah. Well, the premise is, right,
Yeah.
Daredevil,
Yeah.
he is blind,
Yeah.
and so he has heightened senses.
He has
that-
an iron suit with nanotechnology. Oh wait, wrong superhero.
Right, he's just a regular guy with like sticks.
Oh, sorry, he got bit by a spider and he's got these things that can do magic everywhere. Oh no, wait, that's a different character.
Well, the point is that he has a disability and he has enhanced sort of natural abilities, not through a spider, but through just his own sort of attention and his
Yeah.
practice or something. And what ends up happening is that he's a billion times better of a fighter than anyone else would be who has sight.
But no, there is an origin story. It's not just he's blind. There was something else to it.
What?
There was chemicals. Something made him better.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Then to me, it's a much better story if with Book of Eli, Zatoichi, Daredevil, if being blind actually is a deficit on some level and you know, like someone comes up and is just really quiet
Yeah.
and manages to stab him in the arm
Yeah.
because they're really good at making sure they don't make a lot of noise. But they never play into that. It's like him being blind has really nothing to do with the story.
Yeah.
He's just a really kick-ass fighter
Sure.
who has this blindness that doesn't really play a role unless he's trying to read something. Do you know what I mean? Like to me, it's just a missed opportunity.
I will grant you that, but
And plus, it's just not a very interesting show. Like,
But it's
and it's just a shit ton of gore. Really, it's just like breaking of bones and
I liked it.
The
The fighting was
storyline
fun.
Is this? Tell me the storyline of the first season.
But it's a superhero
You can't even tell me.
show. It's a superhero show.
Tell me the Joker, the most recent movie. Tell me the storyline of
I know,
that.
but that's setting a new
That's
bar.
good. That's
It's a
good,
new bar.
right? Well,
New high bar.
That's good writing.
I hear you.
And I think Daredevil is it's just not interesting to me.
All right.
Number 22, Chernobyl. It's
sure.
weird that this would be number 20. I find it interesting that this show was so loved by people. I loved
Right.
it. I watched it.
Yeah.
But I found that I think one of the reasons why I didn't like it as much as the general public is because I know the story of Chernobyl.
Okay.
And so
I think a lot of people did not know this story.
right. I'm just a nerd about this sort of stuff and lived through it in the 80s. And so when I was watching the show, I was like, oh, that's pretty interesting. I'm getting way more details. But I basically, in fact, upon watching the show, I was like, oh, I actually thought that the devastation was worse than that.
Right.
Like I'm watching the show, I'm like, okay, that's not so bad because.
I might sneeze any second.
Okay, go for it. The psychology involved in this show was social systems and power and the power structure results in a reactor explosion and then people dying.
Yeah.
So when you look at the show, you're like, well, who's to blame? Well, you're like, well, the system is to blame. I hope that's what people walk away with, which is like when you have a system that is set up for various reasons to suppress knowledge and to privilege certain ideas, like Russia can or the Soviet Union can do no wrong, and you don't have freedom of the press and these kinds of things, then you have a disaster that happens on your own soil, and then you have lots of people dying unnecessarily when they didn't have to.
Didn't Howard Jones write a song about this?
What?
No one ever, except the system, is to blame.
Number 21, Star Trek Discovery. In this show, there's some psychology. There's trauma and torture.
Star Trek what?
There's a new Star Trek.
Really?
Yeah, it has Tig Notaro in it.
What?
And there's trauma. It's actually kind of good. I mean, it's a lot more visually exciting than previous incarnations.
Is it closer to Battlestar?
Yes. Yeah. And it's also, it moves very quickly too. Like the episodes move very fast, and the Klingons are pretty interestingly realized. Like the costumes and the makeup and the language. Like they don't speak English.
Nice.
So you have to read subtitles when the Klingons are talking. And
like old school Star Wars instead of the bullshit accents of the.
Number 20, The Expanse. I liked the first season quite a bit.
What is that?
You should watch it. You'd probably like it. Yeah.
FX or
maybe.
Okay.
I don't know where anything is.
Yeah, sure.
But The Expanse is sci-fi, but it's real sci-fi in that it's set, say, 200 or 300 years in the future. It's totally within our own solar system, and like there are people who live in microgravity, and they're miners on the asteroid belt.
Okay.
And as a result, their muscles and their bones atrophy, and so they can't really live on Earth anymore. Oh. And there's unions, and they really, for the most part, get the physics down really well.
Are they like, oh man, I guess when we could have sent robots, we made the wrong call.
Maybe. But like one just detail that you'll never see in another show, or very rarely, is that, you know, when you're traveling from point A to point B, like say when we travel to Mars, for example, the fastest way to do it is to constantly accelerate.
Right.
So you launch into space, and then you constantly accelerate. Your engines are just perpetually on. Mm-hmm. And this means that you have a constant G-force that is fake gravity on your ship. Mm-hmm. So that helps you in terms of your ability to get around, and also like helps with your muscle problems and that kind of thing, and is blah, blah, blah. And then midpoint, you turn around and you decelerate. Uh-huh. And again, you get gravity from that as well. They do this on The Expanse. So the engines will be, and then at a certain point they turn around, and then they decelerate because if they don't slow down, they'll crash into the planet.
Right.
Anyway,
that's 9. The quickest way to get there, basically.
It's the most. There's a lot of plus sides. Yeah. Obviously, you can just sort of drift. Yeah. But there's a lot if you have enough fuel. Blah blah. Anyway, 19, Transparent. I think this is pretty obvious as to why this would be on the list.
Wait, I'm blanking. What was that one?
It's a TV show about trans people and
I don't know
and queer people. Yeah, the father is a trans woman.
Okay.
And I know a lot of trans people who actually like this show and think that it's actually a good representation of a particular sort of trans person, if you will. Okay. It's not universal, of course. Jeffrey Tambor plays the trans woman at the matriarch of the family, so to speak. He left the series because of sexual harassment allegations as well. 18, Rick and Morty. 17, True Detective.
Oh, I forgot. Well, I've only seen the first season actually.
Yeah, I thought True Detective. I tried to watch the first season, and I don't know,
Wait. You did watch the first season. We talked about it.
Kind of,
right?
like, yeah.
But second season was not interesting to me. So
I thought the
didn't-
first season was also not that.
Really? Oh,
interesting.
I really liked the first season.
Yeah,
But I haven't seen 2 or 3.
it just had. There were scenes in that first season that were awesome. Like there are some scenes that if occasionally I'll just watch on YouTube.
Yeah.
Like the shootout in the projects.
Yeah.
Or the shootout at the end when they discover him. And but there's so much like drivel in between those scenes that it was hard to watch. 16 Westworld, similar thing with that. Disappointing, really. Loved the first 3 or 4 episodes. Just loved Westworld. Got bored and confused because I didn't really know what was
It
happening.
does get boring, man. It's hard to watch for me. That show late at night was really hard to watch.
Yeah.
I would fall asleep every single time.
Yeah. I mean, that says something, right? And I felt like by episode 8, I was like trying to trudge through it rather than really, because I wanted to know what was going to happen rather than. 15 BoJack Horseman. We have there's a number of our listeners who desperately want us to watch this show.
I've watched BoJack. I think it's very funny.
Yeah.
But I've watched it as in like I've seen, I don't know, maybe 1.5 seasons worth. Really enjoy it. My brother has been after me for years. He like swears by that show, and he's like, and it gets so deep, and it gets so like blah blah. So I guess I need to watch more of it.
Yeah, the little bit I've seen of the show definitely gets into depression and and insecurity and a particular coping style to depression and insecurity and masculinity.
Yeah.
Number 14, Black Mirror. 15, Modern Family. 13, Modern Family. There's so many things we could say about psychology with Modern Family. I actually use clips from the show to show how family systems operate.
Really?
Yeah, because the show actually demonstrates
Interesting.
that pretty well. Roles and the way anxiety is transferred around the system. And it frequently talks about how family is very important and how relationships are very important.
I mean, Ohana does mean family.
It does. Criticisms about this show in terms of social justice and psychology is that Gloria is a stereotype of a Colombian. As a Colombian, Umberto, do you have any comments on that?
I'm a lot like Gloria. Well, yeah, but I'll fucking take it because we have no Colombians in any media up here, you know?
Yeah. And one could argue that if you watch enough episodes, you get a fuller picture of her character, but I will grant that she's one of the least developed characters on that show.
Yeah.
And I think that that's not necessarily on accident. Yeah. I think it is partially like they want to keep her as this weird sort of foreign thing.
I mean, I will say, in general, and I know you know this on the Asian side of the fence, but like Hispanics are definitely tokenized quite often in shows and movies and things, right? Yeah. Like the Hispanic in general is the drug or the gang member or the, you know, it's like it's not common to see like a normal character that just happens to be Hispanic.
Right. Also, there are certain criticisms of the show where people say, you know, all the women stay at home and don't work. Like Gloria stays at home and doesn't work for the most part. And I kind of get that too, but a lot of the women on the show do work. You know, the Mrs. Dunphy, she has a job. So anyway,
sorry, I almost feel like that comment itself is a little classist in that there are a lot of families that they can't afford to not have the mom stay at home because they have like 4 or 5 kids and they can't afford a freaking nanny.
Yeah. Some people will also point out that the only Asian is an immigrant child who was adopted on that show.
Okay.
It's just, now again, if this was, if Hollywood had a representation of Asians,
right,
that was commensurate with our population, meaning 7% of every hero was Asian, 7% of every lawyer was Asian, 7% of every main character was Asian American, if we were in a world like that, then it wouldn't bother me. But it does kind of bother me that in Modern Family and all the other fucking shows, as soon as an Asian is brought onto the show, they have to be a foreigner, and it's sort of demeaning. It's just like the only Asian worth having lines on this show is, a needy child from Asia who needed to be adopted by these white people.
Right. Like actually Silicon Valley,
it's exactly the same.
Guy,
yeah. Although that character is hilarious, and he's a really funny stand-up comic.
He's very funny, yes. But he's the Asian,
and he's also born in China. The actor he was born in China, and actually kind of has a mild accent. Anyway, it's just like, but overall, for its time, shockingly open about a gay couple. I mean, it's hard to remember 2009, but at the time, things were different. I feel like today, when you got trans shows and shows completely dedicated to gay people that are watched by everybody. Tig Notaro is on Star Trek, and Star Trek Discovery actually has a gay couple.
Okay,
that is main characters, and essentially the engineer and the doctor are males, and they're in a relationship. And I think they're even married. I'm not sure, but anyway, for the time, Modern Family, you had three families. You had the classic nuclear family with the Dumfries, and then you had this gay couple, and then you had the grandfather with this Colombian woman, and a third of every show was just about this gay couple, and they weren't hiding the fact that they were gay. Being gay was complete, and they would tackle things. As the grandfather, Al Bundy, wasn't exactly happy about it in the beginning and had issues with it, and they would get into that sometimes. And so I think that the show should be applauded for that. I mean, they didn't have to do that. And I remember at the time being like, whoa, half of Americans aren't going to want to watch this show.
Yeah, it was kind of scandalous.
Yeah. And Stacy and I, when we were in LA not too long ago, did a pilgrimage to the Dunphy house.
Oh.
And took a picture of ourselves out in front.
Nice.
Number 12, Handmaid's Tale.
Oh, yeah. I still haven't seen that, but
it's
heard influential things.
Yeah.
I hear it's a good book.
Yeah. I think if you watch the first couple episodes and you like it, you'll like it.
Okay.
But it's a particular kind of thing.
Okay.
There's a ton of psychology, oppression, obviously, of a class of essentially women, tons of sexism, tons of classism, actually, because like rich women have a lot of privileges that poor women don't have. A ton of heterosexism, control of women's bodies. It essentially is an exaggeration of our society today, and less of an exaggeration of other societies in the world today. Fear of women having power, using religion to control people, women's sexuality being scary, and having men need to suppress it because it threatens us. It's also kind of a history lesson on slavery and the Underground Railroad, control of women, and to some extent, Saudi Arabia today.
So wait, does this take place in history or
no? It's in the future.
Okay.
So essentially, what happens is, if I remember right, it's a lot of women can't give birth anymore, and so there's this kind of terror that takes over the human race, and different societies deal with it differently. But the United States, in contrast to Canada and other countries, starts to fall into a religious government.
Okay.
And certain laws start to be passed about like, well, the women who can have children need to be like sort of protected or dealt with, and then eventually you get to this society where I'm not really remembering the history that well, but eventually you get to this history. There this situation where you have these handmaids who are essentially
the ones that can't give birth.
The ones who can give birth.
Oh, okay. The handmaids are the ones that can give birth.
I think think so. I can't. And they are, impregnated, and
I see.
for the betterment of the society. And they
Well,
have
like
they have,
without their consent.
yeah, they have no rights. They're essentially
geez.
raped regularly.
Oh, geez.
And they are essentially slaves. And then there's this other class of women who are servants, and there's this underground railroad that tries to free the women so they can go to Canada, and also, like, when Canadians come to the United States, everyone has to act like everything's fine, and if you, as a handmaid, if you act like you don't like your job, then you're going to be really punished. So in the beginning, a lot of Canadians are like, "Whoa, those Americans are really kind of crazy," but I don't know, they seem to like it.
Why don't they build a big wall or something?
Yeah. 11, Twin Peaks: The Return, which is sort of weird that would be on this list. I was a avid, massive Twin Peaks fan in 1990-ish, and was really looking forward to the Showtime sequel, if you will, or continuation of the story. But I couldn't really get through, and I love David Lynch.
Yeah.
And this is David Lynch right down the middle. But I just found like they took way too long to get back to the original characters. The first like 4 or 5 episodes, well, the first episode is just kind of like, where are we in the world right now?
I see.
And then it starts to focus on Agent Cooper, and he's like in this weird state, and he doesn't understand who he is. And there's several episodes where it's just kind of like, and then eventually they get back to Twin Peaks, and I couldn't get that far. But there is some psychology to Twin Peaks in general. Like, it's been 30 years. So the main storyline is Laura Palmer gets killed by her father, who was possessed by this, essentially like this demon called Bob. And so she would, it just gives me chills because this fucking show was so scary. God damn. Bob would be at the foot. Did you ever watch the old Twin Peaks?
No.
So this terrifying actor who was actually a makeup artist that they hired, like that David Lynch was like, you have the face of Bob, and they hired him. And so Laura Palmer, this teenager, she'd be raped by this guy named Bob. And Bob would do all these things to her, like read her diary and terrorize her. And then she would see her dad. And then over time, she started to slowly realize that Bob was her dad. Bob was inside of her dad, and her dad was the one that was, and
oh no, Bob, her human dad had been possessed by Bob.
Right.
Okay.
So her dad essentially was raping her at night, and it was really hard, obviously, for her to accept. And so she copes with all this difficulty in various different ways by becoming a sex worker and using drugs and da-da-da. And she has to lie to all these people. So like the prom queen had this dark sort of side to her, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I will sometimes hear from clients and other people who were being sexually abused by their family member. And they will describe it in a very similar way. They would be like, I loved my dad. If it was that, I loved my dad. My dad was a sweet guy. He cared about me. He spent time with me. But there were these other times when this other side of him would come out, and he would physically abuse me or sexually abuse me. And it was like this duality. And I was terrified of the Bob, and I hated the Bob, but I loved the daddy. And and to have that's
so heartbreaking.
Yeah, and the original Twin Peaks show,
really
gets into that. Yeah. Number 10, Broad City. Have you ever seen that show?
Broad City.
Yeah, it's sort of like, it's 2 women, and it's sort of like It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, but it's 2 women in, I think, New York. It's a pretty groundbreaking show because
isn't Broad City the name of an improv troupe?
I don't know,
or an improv thing.
So it's two women, and they were very raunchy, and very, very sex positive, if you will.
Okay.
Very feminist, one could say, because it subverts traditional gender roles. The 2 women, they like sex. women, because a lot of times TV shows, they'll have, even It's Always Sunny to some extent, the men can be funny and outrageous,
Right.
while the girl has to be like a little bit more mature. The Simpsons, you got Bart and Homer, who are funny and outrageous and irresponsible. Lisa and Marge, they have to be, mature and not the crazy ones. And so we have this trope, and it's a sexist thing. It's like we can't really handle women being off the chain, if you will. We have to, men should be allowed to make mistakes. If women make mistakes, then where are we, right? We need women to be in line. We don't want women to make mistakes. And so Broad City completely does away with that, and these two women are just making mistakes all the time, and are frivolous and immature at times, but have a genuine sort of humanness to them. They're full characters with flaws and strengths, and it's a pretty groundbreaking show. Number 9, Orange Is the New Black. We already talked about that. Number 8, Glee.
Oh yeah,
Obviously, Glee played a big role in our society.
Very influential.
Number 7, House of Cards.
Yep, very
which both of us liked. I loved the first season.
Yeah.
Didn't really like second season beyond. Third season, I was just like, come on. 6, Stranger Things. 5, Downton Abbey.
Oh, I never saw it, but I
Again,
know that it's been very influential.
loved the first. This is very common statement today.
Loved the
Downton
first
Abbey.
season.
Loved the first season. Pretty much hated it after that point. The first season was very down to earth and
Would
very.
you say it was very Downton Earth?
Yeah, it was. It's very believable. I'll say that, and the character interactions are believable. After the first season, it gets like, come on, like there's certain things that happen where you're just like, that character has no There's this one woman who works in the kitchen, and she just flip flops all the time, and you're just like, so you know how a writer, there's like, well, I need her to do this, and
Right.
It's sort of be like. If you had Jamie Lannister, instead of flopping kind of twice, where he was a dick at first, then he flip flops to being good, and in the very end he goes back to Cersei. So that's 2 flops.
Right.
Imagine if you did that like 15 times in one season.
Yeah, like basically Heroes suffered from this starting in season 2.5 and 3, and where like Sylar, Sylar wasn't.
Sylar, yeah.
He was bad, then good, then bad, then good.
Yeah, yeah, and I think
what do we need?
I think what happens is the writers, they're just like, well, wouldn't it be a twist if he was good? And they don't like think. You realize the watchers, they're not just watching this one episode. They've watched it up until this point. And number 4, The Walking Dead, as you said, and number 3, Mad Men. We haven't talked about Mad Men.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Ooh, I totally forgot, and I really liked a lot of Mad Men.
I was a pretty avid watcher of Mad Men the first 3 seasons, I think, and I don't remember disliking it after that, but I don't remember being at the top of my priority list.
Absolutely. And the one thing that I will say that they did less and less of is what I love the most about Mad Men in that first season and a bit in the second season is really dive into the ads. Like they did such a good job with like showing you what they came up with and his speeches about it and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And that kept happening, but it happened less and less because more and more it was about
Soap
his
opera.
dysfunction and his, and all this.
Number 2, Breaking Bad, which you would be happy that's in there.
Yeah.
And number 1, Game of Thrones.
Yep. So we actually nailed quite a few, but there's a lot of stuff that I've never even heard of or watched or.
So I made a list of every TV show, major TV show in the 2010s, and I'm just going to read them all because I was like, well, what's not on the list?
Sure.
Because I was thinking there's 30 on the list. It seems like that's probably all the shows. It's not. Big Bang Theory, The Office, Parks and Rec. On this article, The Simpsons, How I Met Your Mother, Sherlock, The Americans, Roseanne, Boardwalk Empire, The Masked Singer. Dancing with the Stars, America's Got Talent, The Kardashians, The Bachelor, Duck Dynasty, True Blood, Grey's Anatomy, Sense8, Unbelievable, the OJ doc, RuPaul, Pretty Little Liars, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, Caprica, which is a Battlestar Galactica, Family Guy, The Good Wife, Workaholics, American Idol, Big Mouth, 30 Rock, NCIS, and all the various incarnations. Better Call Saul, Doctor Who, The Leftovers, This Is Us, The Clone Wars, Star Wars Rebels, Fargo, Trailer Park Boys, It's Always Sunny, The Voice, The Night Of, Mr. Robot, Louie, Master of None, Homeland, Shameless, Making a Murderer, OJ
God.
Crime Story, or American Crime Story, OJ, Bates Motel, Survivor, American Race, House of Lies, Fleabag, The Tick, Superstore, Big Little Lies, Archer, Bob's Burgers, Killing Eve, Adventure Time, Girls, and the list goes on and on from there.
By the way,
There's a shit ton of
there's
TV
a
shows.
shit ton of TV shows. By the way,
All of them good. Like a lot of the shows on this list are actually like, I really like those shows.
did you watch The Leftovers?
I didn't.
So The Leftovers, as a series, was good. It was, really good. But they had one episode in particular, and it was in the first season, where it was some of the, actually probably top 3 best TV watching experiences of my life.
Really?
Because it was so intense. And it was, I won't go into it because it's a spoiler. But anyways, it was really strong. And it's got Timothy Price from American Psycho.
All right, people. So let us know what you think of the list that we had. Just to review our lists here. Top 5 most influential for me: Trailer Park Boys, Stranger Things, Black Mirror, Game of Thrones, Orange is the New Black. My top 5 favorites: Black Mirror, Stranger Things, Parks and Rec, Game of Thrones, The Americans. Berto, yours?
My top most influential was Top Chef, I guess. I was forced into that one. But Stranger Things, Walking Dead, Breaking Bad, and GOT. And my top 5 personal shows were Rachel Maddow, Rick and Morty, Gravity Falls, Nathan For You, Black Mirror, and Sunny.
So we have a scholarship that because we met a goal on Patreon, so we have a $2,000 scholarship. The due date for applying is December 31st, 2019. And we actually had an anonymous patron
I saw that.
who donated $2,000
That's crazy.
for us to have another scholarship.
Insanity.
She actually said, I'm just going to give you $2,000 and do with it scholarship-wise what you want. And I was like, well, how about we do another scholarship? So we're doing two $2,000 scholarships. We're going to grant those at the beginning of 2020. Go to our website. If you're a student in mental health, you don't have to be a listener. You don't have to be a patron. And you have made a difference in the world up till this date, and you plan on making a positive difference in the world in the future, then go to our website and apply.
That's incredible.
After this point, we will have donated close to $20,000
incredible.
in philanthropy. And all this money is because you out there became a patron of the podcast. It's not technically our money because I just take, a portion of the money that you donate to the podcast through Patreon, and I put it aside and we use it towards various different things. We've already given, I think, $5,000 in scholarships already to people that need it. I mean, just think about these people that are students and they're struggling. And one of the people we gave a scholarship to was going to have to drop out of her doctorate program. These people have volunteered their extra time to making the world a better place without getting paid, without any recognition, really. And they're out there doing things that, while we're watching Breaking Bad, they're out there on the streets actually helping human beings and doing wonderful work to make our society a better place. And what a wonderful thing that you, the listeners, as patrons, can give them a little bit of wind beneath their wings and a little bit of recognition so that they can feel rewarded for, doing what they're doing, and it will, likely motivate them to continue doing that work. It's just a wonderful thing. Also, we've given money to LGBTQ charities, animal charities, homelessness charities. Also, if you want to join us on Facebook, do that. The main place where we do a lot of our polls and announcements is on our Facebook page. I know some of you don't have Facebook accounts, but if you could create one just so you could pay attention to that. The other place is on Instagram. You can join our Instagram. I don't know how you follow us on Instagram.
Yeah, you follow.
You can also join the Facebook fan group, which I don't go to, and Berto does. It's where it's just, you can just, as a fan, you can post whatever you want. Also, join us on YouTube at 2 o'clock Seattle time, YouTube Live. I do an hour. Sometimes Berto joins me of Q&A. Anyway, and please take care of yourself because
You deserve it.